Hey Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols, and I'm here to bring you your Nichols Worth. And today I've had some people ask me, what are some of these terms that I use, like edge lining and line matching and ghosting? What do these things mean? So I'm going to show you real quick, just so you can kind of have an idea when we use these terms, what we're talking about. So first of all, when we talk about paper and you hear the word GSM, GSM means grams per square meter, and it's a thickness of the paper. Think of it like in television terms, like 1080p, and how many of the little pixels you cram into one little spot on the screen. This is kind of the same. This is how many meters of paper are crammed into one little square. So the higher the GSM, the thicker the paper. Now, just because a paper is thick does not mean it is opaque. For example, this is a 36 GSM paper, but this is a 28 GSM paper, and as you can see, they have about the same opacity. So what they do in order to make the paper opaque is they will coat it with some sort of material. This is a French milled coated paper. Now there are all sorts of different types of material they'll coat the paper with to keep it opaque. Opacity simply means this: when something has a higher opacity, that means that you can see through it less. When it has a lower opacity, that means you can see through it more. Some very thin paper can have a very high opacity, just like this 28 GSM. Now the thicker the paper, obviously the more opacity it's going to have. Generally speaking, in premium Bibles such as this one and this one, they both have some sort of coating on the paper. So that's what we're talking about there. Now, what does it mean when we say glued binding versus a Smith sewn binding? Well, this is an incredibly important thing, and two things you look for to see if a binding is sewn. Number one is you go to the beginning of your book block, and then you kind of get past all of your cardstock pages, and what you do is you look in there and you can see evidence of it sewing. You can see the holes punched, you can see the threads, so that's when you know that it is a sewn binding. A second piece of evidence you look for in more of your cheaper blocks is you look for something called overcast stitching. This is overcast stitching. That's when they take the stitching and they overcast it after the first signature and the last signature. And what that does is that kind of adds an extra layer of security, because a book block is typically at its weakest point in the first and last signature. Now, what do we mean when we say line matching? When we say this text is line matched, what that means is the text on the front of the page and the text on the back of the page are lined together, so it masks what we call ghosting. What is ghosting? This is also known as show through, and you can see it right here. It's when the next page or the previous page, depending on where you're at, shows through the page, and we call that ghosting. All right, one more thing. What is edge lining? Because this has confused some people. Some people have thought that edge lining is actually perimeter stitching, but edge lining is not perimeter stitching. This is perimeter stitching. Edge lining is when they take the flap from your liner and they glue it to your end sheet and your text block right here in order to hold that in place to give it an extra measure of security. So those are a few questions I've been asked. Just to answer a few more that I may think are kind of obvious but you may not know, is this is called perimeter gold. So whenever someone says it has perimeter gilding, that means they have this right here. That is usually applied with some sort of a tool. Rebinders will generally use like a pencil type of tool, where this is probably a little more machined. And then when we say raised spine hubs, this is where they put the inserts to kind of cover the thread marks on the book block, and they'll give it a decorative look rather than it being all just humpy and ugly looking. Tool work. This is when they take a tooling device and tool out your cover to make it look a little more nice. Yap. What is yap? Yap is something they put on the end of a Bible in order to kind of protect your gilding. This is a full yap. Whenever it touches or comes really close to touching, that's considered a full yap. Semi-yap is when it doesn't quite come as far. And then of course this one would be one that has a standard yap. So these are just a few terms that you may or may not know. And then one last one I want to tell you about is art gilding. This one kind of is a pet peeve for me. When people call the gold gilding art gilding, that is not art gilding. Art gilding is this part, when they have like an accent page dye. This is kind of like a fuchsia or a pink. It's a little more prominent in this one, where you see it's gold here, and then you can see it pink there. So when you open it, it kind of gives you that nice little reward of having the text block hugged with that color. And again, you can see it a little better on this one when it's open. So it's absolutely beautiful. So there are some Bible terms that you may not have known that you know now because you watched this video. Let me know in the comments some other questions you may have and some other things you may want me to address, and things that you hear maybe Bible reviewers or Bible enthusiasts say that you don't understand what they mean. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on this, your Nichols Worth.